delight for us to share this moments with us all. It's always a delight to bring knowledge and to share knowledge. That's what we are, and that's what we do every single day. So it is an honor for me this morning to moderate this conversation. This morning we'll be looking at integrating insights for a cohesive energy transition for Africa. As it is, we stand at the cusp of transformative change when it comes to energy issues. Our continent faces a dual challenge, and it's a dual challenge of meeting the growing energy demands of our people as a continent, and at the same time mitigating the environmental impact of our choices. So today, our panelists will help us, and also every single one of us that are joining today, to have this conversation around the complexities of energy policies in Africa, and looking at also where we stand in Nigeria, the recent developments across Nigeria and the sub-Saharan Africa. And we'll also keep a keen eye on the interplay between national strategies and the broader regional landscape. So what's happening in Nigeria and what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa, and how does that, culminate into a growing energy sector for the continent. We'll also explore the current trends shaping our energy future. We will look at data that is driving decision-making across board. And then we will identify the critical levers for accelerating our transition towards sustainable and equitable energy systems. The discussions this morning will be guided by a shared commitment to foster collaboration, innovation, and a sense of urgency in addressing the energy challenges that we are facing as a continent. And together this morning, my panelists and I will explore the path towards a more resilient and a more prosperous and a more sustainable energy future for all of us in Africa. So it's going to be a very delightful conversation. I have with me my panelists who are absolutely what I call the top of the range when it comes to the conversations. We have Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo, who had served as president of the Nigerian Gas Association before now. So I'll just go ahead and introduce our speakers, and right away, we will just go ahead. At the same time, if you have people that are yet to join us, please help us to get them to join very quickly so they don't miss any part of this conversation, as it were. Okay, so Taiwo, if you could just help me to share the profile of our speakers this morning. So this morning we will have Professor Kenneth Amaeshi, who is the president of the Sustainability Professionals Institute of Nigeria. He is the professor of sustainable finance and governance at the School of Transnational Governance, and is currently on leave from the University of Edinburgh, where he's the chair in business and sustainable development and director of scaling business in Africa. He's also a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, an honorary professor at the University of Cape Town, and the president of the Sustainability Professionals Institute of Nigeria. A leading scholar on sustainable business and finance in the Global South, his research focuses on financial market reforms, governance, and sustainability strategies. He has significantly contributed to Afrocapitalism and works closely with businesses and governments in Africa, Europe, and Asia. And that is the president of our institute. He'll be joining us very shortly, so he could also give his welcome remarks. Next on that is our speakers for today. We have Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo. So I'll just wait for her profile to come up. So Audrey is a seasoned business leader with over 29 years of experience in strategic planning, corporate governance, and entrepreneurship development. She co-founded Falcon Corporation, a leading indigenous energy company in Nigeria, where she serves as deputy managing director. Audrey is also the managing director of Optimera Energy, With multiple degrees and executive certifications, Audrey holds key positions in the energy sector, including chairman of the advisory board for the Nigerian Gas Association and member of the International Gas Union, ESCO. She sits on several boards, including Friesland Campina Wamco Nigeria PLC and Lagos Business School Advisory Board. Audrey has received numerous awards for her contributions to entrepreneurship and the energy sector, including Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, West Africa 2014 Award. She's passionate about developing African institutions and leaders with global perspectives. A philanthropist, an author, Audrey founded the Barnabas Widows Empowerment Foundation and the Double Impact platform. Known as the Impactioneer, she's a sought-after international speaker and has published 4 books. Audrey is married with 4 children. So thank you so much, Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo, for joining us this morning. It is always a delight to have you on a panel. And I am very excited, looking forward to the conversations that we'll be having. Our next speaker is Mr. Olumide Lala. Olumide Lala is an accomplished change manager and business process improvement executive consultant with over 30 years of industry experience in capital markets, product development, financial services, and green finance and sustainability. He provides IT and business consulting, capacity development, and project delivery services. Currently, Olumide is the interim CEO at Climate Finance and Investment Accelerator Limited and a member of the GRI Economic Impact Working Group, where he provides guidance on finance and investments. His specialties include climate finance, policy advisory, business process improvement and redesign, process intelligence strategy, change management, and business development. So once again, I would like us to just welcome, you can put that in the chat box, welcome our speakers this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I particularly want to say thank you to Mrs. Audrey. She is not in this continent at the moment and having to join us with the time difference. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We truly do appreciate you. I think that we do not have Professor Amaeshi yet, but he will join us very shortly. So I think that it will just be good for us to just go into this conversation this morning. We have quite a lot of things we want to talk about this morning, and it will be good if we had enough time. So we'll just go right in. I would like to welcome our first speaker this morning, Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo, to share her thoughts, particularly on the theme that we have defined this morning, in terms of defining what is a just energy transition within the African continent. And what does that mean for social, economic, environmental justice in Africa? And also from your perspective, you know, with the work you've done within the gas sector and looking at the transition as we talk about it within the energy space. So Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo, please.
All right, good morning, Ini. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my absolute delight to be with you this morning. Yes, it's very early. I wouldn't say no to my sister, and wouldn't say no to an organization that I truly, you know, just respect. Thank you all so much. I appreciate the invite. So we're talking today around the issue of energy transition and what that means from the perspective actually of a just energy transition. So one of the things that is very clear is that the world has been in the last few years on an absolutely unprecedented push towards less carbon intensive world. All right, so trying to move away from the hydrocarbons into the more renewable sources. So we're talking about solar, wind, geothermal energy, nuclear energy, and so on. And it's very clear why this has been happening. I mean, you and I know, even in Nigeria, we can see what climate change has done to the environment, okay? And this comes from decades of not paying attention. So there's a lot of focus around seeing how we can reduce emissions and all that. Of course, being mindful of the next generation. So sustainability has been quite a conversation for a while yet, paying attention to the fact that we don't want to deplete the earth of the resources. Some of the resources are quite finite. And of course, technology has also been shifting. We're mindful of the fact that there's a lot of new things that create energy efficiencies, that bring down the cost even of deploying energy and so on and so forth. And so these are some of the things that led to start thinking in terms of an energy transition and all that. But the conversation is really not only about shifting away from low carbon to lower carbon. There are other things that we'll be mindful of looking at, apart from the energy efficiency, appliances, how we deploy in our homes, in our industries. There have been conversations around storage, especially when we're talking about renewables. As you know, think about something like solar. Before, it used to just be when the sun is shining, but there's technologies that have come up where we're now thinking about how to store, to make sure that we optimize those things. Because of the push of technology as well, we're seeing smarter grids, we're seeing deployment of technology into metering and so on and so forth. So it's been a lot that is happening, and the world would only benefit from it. But in the last few years, you found that people have now started to think about just energy transition, not just the energy transition. And that's the conversation we're having today, saying that it's not only for us to pay attention to transitioning from fossil fuels to more renewable sources, but we have to recognize that we must be responsible in that transition, because otherwise there could be negative consequences on workers, consequences on communities, perhaps entire nations, right? So the just energy transition is really a framework that tries to say, can we do better as we're thinking transition, so that we don't create a new set of challenges as we move towards renewable. And this has now been dimensioned primarily through, of course, social justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. And I'll just touch on what this speaks to before going a bit further. So when we talk about social justice, we're thinking about equity. As we transition, the conversation is also around how can we make sure that those remote and underserved communities are not left out. It will be so easy to be doing a transition, and it's still, I mean, if you again just look at Nigeria, it's still that we are transitioning to, and some most have no power. So in a just transition is to say that we are mindful that some people have never even had power at all. And so whatever else we're doing, we must be thinking about solutions for those kinds of people. In looking at that also is to make sure there is decent work is one of the themes, which is that as we begin to move more and more towards the renewable, some people might lose their jobs. So there is a retraining and reskilling that needs to happen for those who are, traditionally in the high carbon economy or industry, I should say, and making sure that as jobs are being created for those in the renewable sector, we're not losing out on the skills that these people have. It talks about the empowerment of communities, trying to make sure that as we're doing renewable energy, we're not just doing solutions that people, but there is active engagement of the communities so that they have a sense of agency, a sense of ownership. Of course, this now feeds right into the theme of economic justice, where it's not just outsiders coming and the solutions, excuse me, but that generally we can encourage local entrepreneurship in clean energy. And in thinking that through, being able to provide the kinds of innovative finances that enable these kinds of enterprise and initiative in the community. Looking also under economic justice at the need to transfer technology. So Africa has a big gap when it comes to technology. No matter how those of us in the metropolis set it, there is need for us to pull in technology, develop our own homegrown solution, but also make sure that any technology that we can keep it right here in the community, build our own domestic capacity. And of course, there are issues around financing, looking at things like green bonds, like carbon credit financing, so that it's actually dedicated to the energy transition. And then, of course, thinking about the environment. So environmental justice is a framework wherein in this push towards renewable, we want to make sure that we are, like I said, responsive to the environment. So some of us will be familiar with themes of the theme of the circular economy, where there's encouragement to repair, to reuse, to recycle. So just making sure that we optimize our when we're towards this energy transition, getting the community involved again, and then paying attention to the imperatives for conservation, because as it is, especially in Africa, the biomass and biodegradation is something we must be looking at. So why are all these things important, and why has the narrative around energy transition been so strong? Well, the World Energy Council, they have some projections they made around global projections, but I speak to this because they talk about the fact that it is expected that globally energy demand is going to be grown into 2040 by 1%, right? And that there are three things that every nation, every region must be paying attention to, so that they have sufficient energy for development. And this is their energy security, energy equity, and of course, the environmental sustainability of their energy system. So it fits well into the theme of the just energy transition. And they have called this a trilemma, because it means that every nation has to be thinking about how to balance this for national prosperity and competitiveness. So when we talk about energy security, it's actually speaking to the ability of any nation to meet their current as well as future projected demand, and how resilient their energy systems are, so that if there's any disruptions, they can bounce back quickly. And excuse me, in this regard, I ask you to cast your mind back to, how COVID disrupted supply chains, how the Russia-Ukraine war disrupted and continues to disrupt that, the new insurrections around the world, and they're impacting so many things. So the strength of an energy system can be tested at such times. When we talk about energy equity, is again that narrative around how do we assure universal, equitable, and affordable energy, both for domestic use in our remote regions, in our larger metropolis, but also for commercial and industrial uses. And every nation must be thinking about that. Then when it comes to the environmental sustainability, it's saying that as every nation is looking at transiting to more renewable energy sources, they must be thinking about mitigation effects they have to put in place to prevent harm to the environment and to reduce climate change impacts. So when we think about the just transition and we think about the energy trial, and bring them together into the context of today's conversation, which is looking at Africa, then you see that Africa actually sitting squarely in that energy transition conversation. We are, as you know, a population on the continent of almost 1.5 billion people, which is about 18.2% of the global population. If we even take just sub-Saharan Africa, it's a huge focus for reasons I will soon explain. We are still over 1.2 billion people, according to World Bank data. But the irony is that when you look at the landscape of consumption of energy in the world, we are consuming a minimal amount. We are the lowest electricity consumer of all the regions on the planet. Yet our population is the fastest growing, is also the youngest. And what this means is that our energy needs hold center stage to be able to provide capacity for all that population to find useful employment and industry as they go along. So the African narrative also is that only about 51.4% of us, according to the last 2022 World Bank data, only about that percentage has access to basic electricity. And this is less than the global average, which is about 87%. And what this means is that we are a dark continent. You and I know this, right? But it's expected that by 2040, we are going to experience what is the fastest, between 2040, one of the fastest growths in terms of electricity demand. And this makes sense, again, because we're seeing the population, there is also a growth in enterprise. So we expect a lot of industrialization, we expect a lot of urbanization, and then that will then feed into the demands for energy in Africa. And all this is happening because of the gaps we already have. We clearly need to be paying attention to elements of the just transition. And that's why it's particularly important. when you look at continents today, already we can see a lot of disparities that need us to pay attention from a developmental perspective. If you look at North Africa, for instance, as far as 2019, they had achieved almost universal access to electricity. But when you come to Southern Africa, that is a very different position. And when you don't have sufficient energy, as it is constraining modern development, is constraining your industrialization, employment opportunities, and quality of life. Now, when you look at Africa from an energy transition perspective, the World Economic Forum has what they call the Energy Transition Index, which is where they review how about 115 countries are performing on that trajectory. And Africa, we have only Morocco, Kenya, and Ghana that are scoring above 50%. I think Ghana is actually the highest. At the same time, we are not doing badly in the sense that when you look at the chart around contributions to global greenhouse emissions and so on, Africa actually contributes 3% of the cumulative. Does this mean we should sit back and ask? No, actually, it means that we are well poised to be sure that, you know, in the next 20 years, when conversations about just transitions are happening, we're scoring very high. So Africa faces many challenges. We want to be sure that in this process, we're achieving energy security, economic development, we're educating, we're providing employment, and at the same time, the transition is very important. So when we talk just energy transitions, we are really looking at many dimensions too. We're looking at things like energy availability. Africa scores very low on that. We're looking at accessibility. It is obviously an EIA report. We have over 140 million that have no energy, and over 1 billion that don't have access to clean fuels. And when you think about that from a social justice point of view, or even from an environmental point of view, you see that this is a problem. I mean, we're practically breaking down our economy, our biodiversity to try to feed ourselves, to try to keep warm, and this doesn't make sense. There is a big conversation around accessibility. So even as we're looking at the just transition, there's a lot of training and retraining of ourselves culturally and socially to be able to accept the new forms of energy. For instance, and I'm sure all of us can relate with this, the jollof rice conversation in Nigeria is sweeter with firewood. Does make sense. Well, let me not confess that I actually believe that as well. But the point is, when you put the environment and the future on the table, then you can forfeit that sweetness, as we call it, because we're thinking about things for today and for tomorrow. Thinking about affordability of energy is a huge one. In the Africa context, very expensive to do energy, a lot of regulated pricing on the governments. That doesn't mean the fact that the infrastructure is expensive to deploy, and there are reasons around that. We don't manufacture anything, excuse me, and suffer from gross underinvestment when it comes to infrastructure, generally speaking, but especially so in the energy sector. And of course, there are issues that are sustainability part. I touched on that before, as well as gender equity. Culturally, you know, we are not big in terms of how we treat women, how we incorporate 50% of our population into productive activity, giving them opportunities for live, to be in places that matter in population and all that. So as we think about energy transition from a just perspective, we must be looking at how we also equip women to be a full part of that narrative, and so we can get the best of the entire population. So Nigeria, yes, we put out our own energy transition plan. I'm sure in the conversation we can do a deep dive further on that. But this is actually a well-articulated plan that talks about how we can focus better, prioritize renewables, how we can leverage on natural gas, which is our defined transition fuel, how we ensure energy for all, and so on and so forth. The challenge being that that plan is supposed to cost us a huge quantum of resources, I think about $1.9 trillion, and we still have to be spending $410 billion, and we don't really have the resources, which means we have to step back and begin to think what are the distinct types of initiatives we can have, though in a coordinated manner, to still be able to move forward regardless of the gaps that we face right now. And a lot of work is being done in that regard. So I will begin to wrap up by talking about the energy landscape in Nigeria currently, and then narrow a bit on gas, because really for Nigeria, we are still in a situation where fossil fuels are the dominant fuel. Talk about energy, and this is the same thing across the continent. In Nigeria, we're talking about anywhere between 74-75% of our energy being provided by fossils, primarily natural gas. Even though we've seen a lot of growth in renewables, the truth is that we are a long way away. And if we could get a proper reckoning and assessment of the contribution of biomass to that, I think those numbers will change significantly. So we have work to do. The question then is, what can we do with natural gas? Why is this always on the table? I mean, this is my space, so I'm going to talk about that. One is that we have an abundance of those resources. Even across the continent of Africa, we know that we have on the continent natural gas reserves that are almost equivalent to the US, and it's a cleaner fuel. And one of the things that is a challenge with renewables, so in this conversation of the just transition, we must be mindful of the fact for Africa that we actually need the natural gas, which is a more stable fuel, to balance out the variability factor in renewables. You can't have solar for so long. Even though we're developing battery technologies, there are some concerns even around the batteries, their disposal, and so on. So everything has an environmental impact that must be factored in as we're thinking about this just transition. In Africa, we find that natural gas is already meeting about 50% of the needs in the region, right? In North Africa in particular. So it's now in sub-Saharan Africa that we have to see how best to leverage those resources. And Nigeria, we're not doing too badly. And we've seen a lot of developments in East Africa, in West Africa, in South Africa. We've actually, the last 10 years, been responsible for almost 40% of global gas discoveries. So natural gas is that fuel that we can leverage on to immediately enable various sectors of industry. And because it's a cleaner fuel and it has been recognized as an acceptable transition fuel, this is where Nigeria needs to do its own work, where Africa needs to do its own work. Remember what I said, as we're thinking the just transition, we must also be mindful of how we optimize our resources. So Nigeria has to first be thinking resource optimization currently, how we are competing globally, and as well as also thinking about how we are transiting. And there are many things that need to happen. We will get into that. Policy needs to change. We need to look at even our cultural practices. We need to look at financing, which is a big conversation here, because like I said earlier, most of what we do, we have to import the technologies, we have to import the components, and that is literally taking jobs away from our people. We are not building domestic industries and the rest. But natural gas is the key one that can drive a lot of these processes. It's large scale sector enabler and on and so forth. So I'm going to wrap up here because I was given about 20 minutes to say that the narrative for Africa from a just transition perspective is very timely, but we have a lot of things to do. And well poised, because the same conversations that enable a just transition, conversations that actually then enable the economic development and prosperity, putting energy central to as we're shaping across our nations and regions, as we're shaping those conversations, is then also important for us to be thinking.
Please, can you mute? Somebody's mic is on. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, so thank you. So I'm just saying that I know more into the conversation, but it's to say that we can be lost in the very real challenges when we think about the transition, because we currently the state of economy, the continent is, there are some quick levers we have to take in a coordinated manner for us to then touch the reality of the transition. But I must say that we should pay attention to the fact that a lot of work is being done. A lot of work is being done. A lot of private sector involvement are doing their way. And we can tighten that shape. I think that we will see a lot of skill. So with is that we've spent too many decades not paying attention. So we will not expect to see any governance. That's it. for this, keeping the conversation going, the importance of bringing in the professional associations, the private sector practitioners, and the table. You cannot evaluate that. So I'm going to stop for now and for the rest of the conversation. I see our prof is here, and I'm sure that make it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Audrey. Thank you. I mean, the vast experience that you bring on board in this particular area is clearly very definitive of all the conversation that we're having today. And just to highlight, before I bring Prof on for his opening remarks, just to highlight some of the key things that you mentioned, because we're going to, try and pull out some of these key factors one of the things you clearly defined was the issue of the fact that Africa in itself is still struggling with the issue of lack of electricity in itself, and that in itself creates most of the energy crisis that we have. And then, of course, looking at it, the linkages with the SDGs, and one of the key areas of course, decent work. And we're going to talk about that in terms of when we begin to look at digitalization, how is that affecting the energy sector, and what is changing? Because when we look at the role of AI, we look at the role of so many things changing within the tech space. How does that work within the energy sector as it were? And then, of course, the data from the World Energy Council. I think the issue of energy security and equity is very, very critical, as you have raised it, because when we look at the areas around resilience, the areas around meeting our every need, when we look at it from the social development perspective and the social justice area that you've spoken about. And then I like the point you've raised around, where Nigeria is in terms of the energy transition index. The truth of the matter is, yes, Morocco, Ghana, Kenya are high up there. But for us in Nigeria, the index says we are number 108 out of 120 countries. And that itself brings a conversation that I think that we are going to really have, because yes, we have the Climate Change Act, we have the Energy Transition Plan, which of course demonstrate a commitment to achieving that zero emissions by 2060. But are we truly, as a nation, and also looking at it that, considering the fact that some countries within Africa are already doing that, or already on the path to net zero, but in Nigeria, are we truly really making any progress towards net zero? I think these are some of the conversations we're still going to try and pull out. So I will just call on Professor Ken Amaeshi to give us his opening remarks. Hello, Prof. Welcome.
Hello, morning, and apologies for being late. I was trapped in another meeting. Audrey, thank you very much. It's always good to see you and listen to you. And I hope I won't make any mistake to say the first time I met you was through Ini, and that was a long while ago.
Yeah.
The more it changes, the more it remains the same, right? Yeah. So thank you, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. So my name is Kenneth Amaeshi. I'm the president of the Sustainability Professional Institute of Nigeria. So it's always a pleasure to see how the institute is growing, and I can't but be proud of my team. In particular, the vice president has been very instrumental to where we are. And as some of you know, I'm a president in absence here, right, so to speak, because I don't live in Nigeria. And so my team has been very, very supportive. So I can't but be pleased to welcome you to this webinar. And it's one of the things we promise our members. One thing is to be a sustainability professional. Another thing is to be up to date in terms of skills and competencies. And last month when we had our induction, the speaker, Bongo Adi, professor, mentioned that we are not just working for organizations, but we also work for society. And in order to work for society, we truly need to be prepared. We need to have broad expertise. We also need to be good change agents, facilitators, all sort of things expected of us. So what we're having today is a way of sharpening our competencies and introducing us to new spaces. I'm not an expert when it comes to environmental issues, for example, environmental sustainability, but it's always good to know what others are doing in that space. And also the meeting point, because whether I'm looking at it from a social side or an environmental side, it's all about impact, positive impacts, negative impacts. So if we're looking at gas or fossil fuel, we are primarily concerned about the positive impacts and the negative impacts of energy production and energy utilization as well. So if we look at it from that singular perspective, then it helps us all to come together. So I know we've started and we can't wait to get to the meat of the conversation. I want to thank our learning and development team, particularly Eunice Sampson, who is the chair or the director of the directorate in charge, and also Mr. Eustace Onebu, who represents us at the Executive Council. They've done a great work putting this together. I also thank our event team. I thank our membership team, stakeholder team, all the different directorates for making this work, because we always like to celebrate our teamwork, and it shows clearly when we have events like this. And we hope that you enjoy this session. And please, if you have ideas on things you think we should consider going forward, feel free to reach out to the Secretariat. Didi is there, Taiwo. So we also thank them for the support they provide, and also how they ensure that some of these webinars and announcements reach travel as wide as we want them to. So I will stop here. I'll still come back at some point as a panelist to give my 2 pence. So Ini, thanks, and over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Thanks so much for those remarks. So let's, without wasting much time, because again, as I said, we still want to be able to have the conversation around what this really means. Again, as Ken said, not every one of us on this call is an expert in this area. So I'm sure there are questions that we have. There are areas that we want some bit of clarity around. What does this mean for me as a sustainability professional in the different sectors that we play in? And what should I be looking at? And how can I support the organization within which I operate? So we'll just go right ahead and call Mr. Olumide Lala. Olumide, we've read his profile, and we'll just be looking at what are the opportunities, and then of course what are the challenges that are available for innovation and growth within the continent, whether you look at it from the climate change perspective, or whether you look at it from the transition itself, into cleaner energy. A lot of organizations are trying to do quite a number of things right now. Not just, I think, yes, the economy is pushing that, but also I think there's also a bit of, what would I call, a bit of consciousness in terms of what this means for us as a country. So a couple of months ago, I started reading about people that were already beginning the transition, the energy transition in their own way. I saw some newspaper articles and stories around people now changing their generators to use gas instead of fuel. And that was very interesting, because I know that for the kind of work that we've done in the social development space over the years, trying to, even before the conversations around clean energy began, trying to get women not to use firewoods in the rural areas, and introducing those clean stoves that were around some years ago. And then, of course, how we dropped again. I remember in the 80s, we went back to using sawdust to cook when gas became so expensive. And then we've seen the increase in the price of gas as well over the years, the fluctuations in the prices, and how this also affects some of the key issues around truly transitioning, because Audrey mentioned something. For it to be just, it has to have some level of social justice. And social justice means the affordability. And when we look at the affordability of what we currently have, is this something that there's room for innovation and growth? So these are some of the areas that we know that, we want to talk about. So I will just allow Mr. Olumide to go ahead. Mr. Olumide Lala, please.
Good morning, Ini, and thank you very much for inviting us. Sorry, I haven't got the background, or I didn't figure out a way to integrate the background into my Zoom, so you just have to make do with the bland colors
That's
of my
fine.
office.
That's fine.
I guess the risk and dangers of being a second speaker, if you will, especially following someone like Audrey, it's that she will have stolen most of your thunder before you actually get there. So, at the risk of rehashing some of the things that has been stated, there are a number of things actually that both yourself and Audrey had mentioned. And I guess the topic of today is actually a just transition, for instance. How do you implement that just transition? I guess we understand the why. The why is, look, I put some slides together, but I think, I'll literally just talk through this rather than actually put stuff up. Look, when you look at the main drivers of the energy transition as we know it, and by the way, we've been transiting for a very long time. Yeah, it's not just started. You just spoke earlier on about moving from sawdust to gas and back again, from firewood to whatever. The issue here, and this is probably why we talk about the just element of it, is actually about the cost of doing this. It's more or less energy poverty. And as I said, look, we understand the why. I mean, the main drivers of an energy transition, especially in Africa, Africa is being driven uh, due to a combination of environmental, economic, and social technology factors. But even within Africa itself, energy poverty has a variance degree. Recently, obviously, the subsidies were removed, and we saw the impact of that across the economy, both from the rich to the poor. And so it is not just a one size fits all. And even when we talk about Africa, we make it sound like, the same issues pertain across all the countries. They all have different opportunities and different challenges, and we'll speak about that. But collectively, I mean, African nations are being pushed towards a more sustainable and resilient energy future, addressing the continent's unique challenges and trying to capitalize, if you will, on what we term as our renewable sources, resources. But I think, in order to look at it from a just perspective, the issue for me is, what does just mean, and to whom, and who is driving the agenda? And I think that's probably where, we need to explore some of the challenges that we have. And, if you talk about some of the issues that we have across the continent, which do not apply in other climes, especially the professor talked about the global north, as we always talk about the global south. Infrastructure issues, whether it's transport or logistics, we have poor infrastructure in Africa. I mean, and I can speak to, I mean, I've traveled the best part of 21 African countries so far. And, the issue across the continent in some cases are similar, but are more improved in other places. Urbanization is a big, big problem. If you take someone like Nigeria, for instance, we typically focus on the rural area and access to energy in the rural area. But if you look at the urbanized cities, Lagos in particular, not necessarily Abuja, but let's take Lagos and the infrastructure that is actually present in Lagos, including the roads, the ports, railways, you know, literally now the amper economic activities. I mean, we've just had loads of rain in Nigeria, in Lagos right now, that has literally ground the entire place to a halt. So the cost of doing business, yeah, even within around transportation, moving things from one place to the other, the logistics issues, getting your stuff out of the port, or even moving stuff up country or down country. There's a lot of issues around that, and that's all powered by energy. So, we've got some trains now, which is an improvement. We used to have them, we killed them, now they're back again. But these are being powered by either diesel, or to some extent we can move to gas. But the challenge we have is the cost of actually putting this infrastructure in place. And of course, we have limited access and unreliable access to electric, which constrains industrial activities for most part. And that's why we're burning so much diesel and the generators. So from even our own perspective, I was talking to somebody a few years ago, and I was talking about the difference between implementing solar panels, for instance, roof solar panels in Nigeria and in England, for instance. And when I said to the person that you don't need to buy batteries or invest in batteries, they were aghast because they couldn't understand why. And that's simply because the grid works. So, in a place like the UK, for instance, if you implement your solar panels, you put your solar panels on your roof, it fits straight into the grid. The grid calculates how much you're giving it. It gives you a rebate. Bob's your uncle. So they say anyway, and aunt's your Nelly. Nelly is your aunt, as it were. But the point is, if you have to do that in Nigeria or any part of Africa, you've got to think about the entire end-to-end infrastructure. So even putting that in place, the economic value of that in rural areas are challenging. They're quite challenged. So, somebody has to finance this. It's not free. And so it has to be economically valuable. So in terms of when you're talking about just transition, even within a country, let alone the entire continent, yeah, the conversation around how you implement these things are quite onerous, as it were. So, economic diversity as well. Right now, most African countries depend on commodities. And to a large extent, this heavily imported raw materials are imported, and raw materials and commodities are exported, making it them vulnerable to global prices. You spoke about the conflicts and the shocks that we had recently. Every time those goes up or down, we get shocks that affects the cost of our energy. So for that alone, we need to start rethinking how we actually stabilize our access to energy without being vulnerable to global shocks. And that's those are some of the reasons why we need to move. People often talk about this as being pushed by the global north. They talk about it a bit as being it's a global north agenda. But you need to look at what are the things that are impacting our own economy, as it were. And I think, and I hate that phrase. I really hate it when somebody makes reference to Africa as a dark continent, as it were. That's a personal choice, a personal view. But, it's not as if we can't do something about it. And the question you need to be asking is, why aren't we doing anything about it? We have political and regulatory instability. I think it was PwC that took a survey about 7 years ago in terms of what are the issues in developing Nigeria. People often think it's access to finance. It's not. It's actually the number one challenge we have in Nigeria, especially, is not just political instability per se, because we've had democracy for the last 25 years, as it were. It's regulatory changes. You cannot rely on your policies not to change. They destroy business. People wake up every single day and just change the rules. And that's why a lot of people are leaving and going elsewhere, because, the step you need as a business person, you need to be able to plan long term. And so if you cannot depend or be certain of the rules that you're playing to, then it becomes an issue for you. Once again, human capital. Now I talk about human capital development from a different perspective. So some of the challenges we have today is not actually developing the capital, it's actually retaining the capital. Yeah. Too many of us are speaking from the abroad. Too many of us are living for the abroad. The question is, how do you retain people to develop your economy? Brain drain, skilled professionals leaving are killing your economy. And that cuts across Africa. I mean, we often thought that the challenge was just about Nigeria. We had a riot in Kenya recently, which mimicked our NSAS. But by God, was that even more, pronounced, as it were. You're going to see more of this. People forget it wasn't too long ago we had the Arab Spring. So these are not new things. So, and all of this speaks back to how do you retain those trained professionals to support your energy industry so that they can provide the energy that we need to other sectors for the right development. Now, Audrey made reference to access to finance. Now, financial inclusion is a big, big problem. Yeah. The banking sectors, the financial sectors, to be fair, over the last 5-7 years, they're doing a lot of good stuff and trying to provide more access to finance, especially gender support among some of the banks and all that stuff. But it's just not enough. And the reason why it's not enough is because the source of the funding, which the banks rely on, your DFIs and all that stuff, rely on the funding coming from Europe mainly. So right now we have about some 10, 15 DFIs or thereabouts, who have invested something like $88 billion into Africa. But all of this have reporting requirements based on European standards. And so it took a lot. I mean, and Audrey made reference to gas, for instance, and we'll speak to that later. But Audrey, it took a lot for us to fight the position that gas is actually a transition strategy. You need to use what you have. But it's often said that he who pays the piper dictates the tune. If you're not using your money and you're asking somebody else to give you money, then you've got to adhere to whatever conditions that you're given. It's just it's the reality of life. So we need to figure out how to blend the monies that we have, the resources that we have, such that we rely less. And also we have to, and Audrey did make a point about the fact that a lot is happening. But for too long, we were on the receiving end, expecting people to just change the rules for our sake without positioning ourselves and actually making a case as to why it needed to be done. So, investment, there's a massive investment gap, especially in the SME sector. Now, a lot of people, when we talk about gas, a lot of these transactions are on the higher end of the market. A lot of economies in Africa are powered by SMEs. A lot of the renewable projects that you see being done are done by new guys in this, to the industry, small entities that are just trying to get money. And startups often struggle to secure funding, especially due to the perceived risk and, more importantly, the lack of collateral. But look, those are some of the some of the challenges that are unique to us because of the way we're set up. We haven't got that consumer-based financial system that allows you to pay as you go, as it were, even though that's now beginning to become more of an option on the continent. But it's still very low scale because of the fact that the companies that are doing this haven't got access to the kind of money they're looking for. So, let's focus. Those are the challenges, and they're quite unique to us, as I said, because a lot of the challenges that we have in Africa, accessing finance, capital, human capital, state of development, political, regulatory stability, and all that stuff, you don't find that in the developed North. And the reason why is that we're still relatively not as mature in that sphere, as it were. So it's difficult for us to just copy and paste solutions that have taken place in other parts to ours. But one thing I will say is that, look, let's look at the opportunities that we have to deal with this. Natural resources. We often speak to Africa as a dark continent, but the truth is Africa has more natural resources in terms of energy production than any other continent that there is, be it from the sun, be it from hydro production. And we've done a fair bit in hydroelectricity. I mean, if you look at the Congo River, for instance, it can power the entire African continent on its own. But it requires not just collective investment, but when you got political instability in a country, who's going to put money there? But we need to look at how we can actually begin to do things on a smaller scale. So renewable energy, for instance, we've been able to get access to a lot of the rural areas. In Nigeria, for instance, I can speak to what the Rural Electrification Agency is doing, and they're doing a lot of stuff and obviously trying to finance a number of projects, especially in the rural areas. As Audrey said, moving people away from firewood and the likes, which obviously has its essence in deforestation. But if you look at some of the mineral wealth that we have as well, we need to be able to exploit some of that, yeah? And some of that has been done. So that would drive effectively the development of projects that would enhance our economic development. Technology is a big one. You'll be amazed. There's some technology, innovative projects that are being done on the continent itself, be it in Nigeria or Kenya or even South Africa, that you wouldn't find or see in other parts of the world, certainly not in the developed North. And the reason being is that, it's often said necessity is the mother of invention, So we will do certain things on the continent here which they wouldn't do elsewhere, simply because we need that. So leveraging your technology, your mobile technology as well, allows you to leapfrog some of these issues. Even within, how do you pay for electricity? One of especially, as I said earlier, we lack to a large extent the consumer financial facilities that pertain in other countries. That's been developed in our countries right now. Nigeria is one. M-Pesa was another invention in Kenya years ago, which has enabled the access to mobile technology, which we've used. It's that's also taking place in Nigeria. So leveraging your mobile technology is something that obviously we need to pay attention to. And I know Audrey used the word a number of times, pay attention to stuff. Well, unless you pay attention to it, you're not going to fix it. You can't if you don't measure something, you can't manage it. And some of the issues that we have, data is another thing that we don't really pay attention to, in order to change stuff. But we're getting there. I don't need to preach to the audience about the availability of our solar and wind resources. But whilst we've been talking about doing this for a while, and taking advantage of it, I often ask the question, why did it take the removal of the subsidies for us to get to a point to realize that, it makes sense to actually start to implement solar panels? Having said that, a lot of the banks, for instance, have moved their branches off generators many months ago. And I wouldn't clearly mention any the names of banks right now, but the head office of, maybe I should actually, because you should give kudos to whom kudos is due. If you go to Sterling Bank, for instance, the head office is powered by solar panel. Yeah, the entire thing is being clouded out. FCMB, for instance, for many years had a project to actually remove all the branches of diesel generators, and they're all run by solar panels. Axis Bank has been doing a lot of stuff in that space as well, and Sterling has been doing a lot of stuff in funding some of these green projects as well. So, to the point that Audrey mentioned, a lot of things are being done and continue to be done, and access to financing for this has been done. But we shouldn't take away from the fact that there's still some challenges there, but those are opportunities. Food security is a big one, and that's big because of the vulnerability to global fractures. The issue of not looking at our agriculture sector and how energy can power that, how we can become more sustainable. Look at your arable land, your water resources, transforming adding value to your agricultural processes through processing plants and reducing the waste within the agricultural sector. You need energy for that, and we're now beginning to look at smart agricultural opportunities. Looking precisely at smart irrigation, precision farming, and the like. So, if we continue down this trajectory, the opportunity is there to improve our agricultural output, but more importantly, improve our food security. One of the things we need to be wary about as well when we start talking about technology is GM foods, but that's another conversation for another day. But even that sector needs access to power. And to the point that Audrey made about having gas plants, I think that's certainly a way to go. The fact that we've moved the conversation away from just diesel to solar panels or straight to renewables, hydro and all that stuff, because they've also got their own disadvantages. The fact that we've actually moved it into a transitional process that speaks about gas as part of that conversation, and we have massive resources in that sector, then for me, that's a great conversation, and we will talk about much later. Speaking more, a point that Audrey made earlier, we shouldn't de-emphasize the opportunities that the youthful population does have if well trained. And I think increasingly, as we go down this route of the sustainability and a more focus on reuse and recycling and the likes, and the utilization of our energy opportunities, even within our educational system, you will find that people will begin to move away just from our formal education to actually taking advantage of the diverse nature of our youthful population. And that would in itself become a massive opportunity to us. And I'll tell you why. you cannot provide, no matter how we try. We are the fastest growing continent in terms of population in the world. You cannot, with all the best in the world, you cannot provide employment for everyone. So there's going to be a massive drive towards entrepreneurship. And I think you cannot do that effectively without energy. So you need to train your people. They need to have the skills to be able to even deploy the manufacturing that you want to do, so that that becomes a demographic dividend to you through education and entrepreneurial opportunities, rather than a big burden, as it were. And one of the things about the younger generation, which you cannot take away from them, is, these are guys, when it comes to adaptive technology and the likes, in the new technology and digital transformation across the board. We've got the Yaba hub, for instance, and those hubs are across all of Africa. Yeah, that positions us for a great future, if only we put the right policies in place. And so, you will have a sphere of entrepreneurship and startups, in innovative ops, that the government, obviously, and private sector need to be able to support, because these are the ones that will provide the startups that we need, especially in the local areas and the rural areas, to provide the energy that are tailored to local nuances, and to meet our various needs across various sectors, whether it's healthcare or agriculture, as I mentioned, or energy production, or whatever. I mean, it wasn't too long ago I was talking about the fact that at some point we will have electric cars in Nigeria. And people used to laugh at me. It wasn't about 5-7 years ago. People used to laugh at me. How can we have electric cars in Nigeria when we don't even have a functioning grid? Well, guess what? You have to put the infrastructure in place. Now, it costs money, but it's an opportunity. It creates new jobs. It creates new private sector opportunities for wealth creation. So, and it takes away the burden from the grid anyway, if you have many grids and the likes. So all of this is going to be supported. And what actually encouraged that conversation for me was speaking to a neighbor who drove a Tesla, for instance, and told me that he can power his vehicle using solar. And one of the things I was concerned about, especially in Lagos, was how do these cars fare in a flooded area? And he said to me, look, go on YouTube, you will find all of these cars being driven through water. So, if you can power a car using solar panels, if they can literally become amphibians and drive through water, why can't we have solar driven cars in Nigeria? Well, guess what? Now we have a lot of governments, local states, talking about empowering Ubers and the likes, or Uber type services using electric cars. We have car assembly plants and car manufacturers in Nigeria. We need to encourage them to do that. Not only does it create opportunities, it moves us away from this conversation. We shouldn't just take the easy route out. Yes, gas is a transition strategy, and you use what you have to empower yourself. Yes, but where is the end game? The truth is, come 2025, most cars in Europe are going to be powered by electricity anyway. So where do you think all these combustion engines are going to end up? They're going to get dumped in Africa. And then we're going to moan and complain about it rather than stand up for ourselves. So we need to look at those opportunities and begin to reflect how we can do that. Now, one of the big things that is coming up is the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's a big, powerful opportunity. Now, I do recall when this conversation started, I was one of those who actually pushed back against it. And the reason why I did was Nigeria being the largest economy. If you're not prepared to take advantage of what is coming your way, you end up being a dumping ground. But if we can position ourselves, the truth is Africa is big enough to look after itself. We've got all the resources, we've got all the education, we've got all the people, all that stuff. The markets are here. That's why people come. But the point is, it's more difficult to do business in Africa as Africans, as Dangote will tell you. He needs 27, 20, something like 34 visas just to get from one country to the other. And that's the richest man in Africa. Yet it's a lot easier for me to fly in from London into Kenya with a British passport than with a Nigerian passport coming from Lagos. It's just madness. So if we are actually looking to the African continental free trade as an opportunity, the entire ecosystem needs to be developed to take advantage of that, so that we don't look back and say, oh, that was an opportunity that we missed. And 20 years from now, we'll say, oh, but we're just thinking about it. No, we need to build all those structures in. And that requires private sector as well as public sector to think together. The opportunities are there. We can build infrastructure and take advantage of partnerships. I know we complain sometimes about the Chinese and taking over Africa and all that kind of stuff. But look, at the end of the day, if they're putting in the infrastructure to get you from A to B, as a business person, what you want to do is get from A to B. You couldn't care less who owns the infrastructure. So if the infrastructure is there, get from A to B. And the more we can get from A to B, we can basically business will flow. We need to do more business within Africa. So the opportunity is there. All of this Jackpot syndrome, it's only a reflection of economic deficiency, as it were. So literally, if you create the opportunity in Africa, who wants to leave Africa? It's a beautiful place. So, as I said, the African Continental Free Trade Area, the policy, the integration of the entire continent is great. There are certain countries that are already looking at passport-free travel, visa on arrival, but that needs to be moved from just tourism to business. And as the infrastructure is put in place, business will follow. The electric grids, putting money into electric grids, sometimes I wonder, it's probably a bit like the time when we shifted from cable to mobile technology. Yeah, there was a time for those of us who are old enough, we used to depend on Nitel. It was horrible. Just making a simple phone call was a problem. So, you had a choice. Either throw a lot of money into Nitel or throw money into digital mobile technology. Well, we know where we are today. It was expensive when it started, very expensive. I mean, to even get a flipping phone was something like 200,000 at 200,000 valuable money then, not 200,000 today. But today, every single person has a SIM card. Everybody has 2 or 3 phones. We will get there, but you've got to start the journey. And the same would apply with energy transition, where I think we need to empower private sectors to look at how you can provide energy, not just within countries, but across countries as well, because the opportunities, as we said, cuts across Africa. And the diaspora is a massive opportunity. I think it was one of the banks took a survey, and I can't talk about recent numbers. Took a survey just before the pandemic. Now, this will blow your mind. Nigeria is meant to be a crude exporting country. Net, Nigeria in 2019 earned something like $19 billion. $19 billion from export of crude, I think, something like that. But 25 billion came in from remittance. 25 billion came in from the diaspora. And the diaspora is not just the abroad, as we know it. There are a lot of money coming in from African countries. People actually just don't go to Europe alone. They work in other countries within Africa and send money back. Can you imagine if you can harness all of that, aggregate all of that monies that is going towards consumables right now? If we harness all of that through some sustainable fund, if you will, or green fund, to invest in developmental projects, especially in the energy sector, this concept of the dark Africa will disappear. We have the money. But, there's this over-focus on, the money must come from Europe. This over-dependency that the only money is something that is, projects are implemented in dollars. I don't understand that. Because think about it. If you had actually developed a project which was financed last year in dollars, today you will be bankrupt. The exchange rate has moved against you. And these are long-term projects. So we need to start thinking about how we can utilize money that we already have in country, how we can encourage the diaspora money to come. The money is already coming. It's already coming. So we need to actually just rechannel it. That's number one. We need to refocus that money and make it more productive rather than just consumables. Yeah, for the ashwebis and the parties that we all like to go to on a Saturday. We need to think. We need to think beyond that, right? And I will tell you this for free. This is money that people are already sending. So it's beyond their consciousness. I mean, if they were to double that money, it would not kill them, especially if they think it's making a difference. Yeah, people want to make impact. So we need to really think about that. Knowledge transfer, especially those, it seems to be a one-way right now. We seem to be moving knowledge from Africa to Europe. The number of people that have gone to Canada, God, it's incredible. I mean, Canada has benefited from Nigeria so much. So about a month ago, some park in Manitoba was named after some Igbo chap. believe it or not. A whole park in, yes, I mean, go and check it out.
Absolutely. I mean, my children schooled in Manitoba, so I understand the Nigerian community in Manitoba.
It's massive, and that's grown over the last 15 years. So, but we need to transfer the knowledge back to do stuff here. Yeah. But, I want to literally just stop with this point. You need to use what you have. Yeah. Europe has used what it had. Everybody is doing the same. Look, let's not fool ourselves. Yes, the world needs to change. We need to change our attitude. We've been doing renewables for a long time, right? But it's sad that we're not doing enough, right? There's a lot of projects that are going on right now in Nigeria, especially, and across Africa, that are making a difference, but we're not doing enough, especially in the energy space, yeah? But use what you have to get to where you need to get. Audrey is in the gas business. 5 years ago, if you talked about gas as a green transition, nobody was listening to you. It was about green bonds to do green projects. Now we recognize the fact that gas emits some 50-60% less carbon than diesel. We need to focus on that, right, and develop the country, but with a view to setting up manufacturing industries that would now produce this stuff, right? If you keep importing, you import poverty and you export jobs. It's not enough to complain. We need to start thinking as a continent, how do you industrialize your continent? You need energy to do that. So it goes hand in hand. But if you know that there's an end game, you will invest in the infrastructure. So we need to look at that because last, natural gas provides a more stable and reliable energy source, to be honest with you, than solar or wind, as much improvement as we've had. But, we're getting there. So, what I was asked to come and speak about are the various opportunities and challenges. I think I've done a bit of that. We'll go into the discussion.
Yeah, so we'll just thank you so much, Olumide. I think that, I mean, the conversations, it's getting broader and the critical issues. Can you hear me now?
You got a bit of an echo going on. We can hear you, but there's an echo going on somewhere.
Is it better now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. I think that some of the clear issues that have really come out and you just help us drive the conversation a bit more. You've talked about, I've always heard the conversation, and I think that there are quite a number of people, even within the sustainability space and even within the Nigerian space, that hold very dear that this is just a global North agenda. There's this push in terms of whether we're talking about it from the climate change perspective or even the energy transition perspective, that Africa doesn't give us as much emissions, Africa doesn't contribute to climate change as much. So why is this push for Africa to be in the forefront or even to be involved in the first place? So I think that conversation is there. Then you talked about issues around political instability and policy somersaults. And there's no doubt about it, because when we look at it in terms of challenges and opportunities, we're also looking at investors coming in. And where you have, as you clearly stated, political instability and constant policy somersaults, how does that encourage investors to stay? And then talking about where African leaders need to put their money where their mouth is. Do we really think that African leaders are willing to do that? Or they're still going to be pandering to the global North agenda, as it were? You've talked about technology. I think that, yes, we've seen an increase in solar panels. And I think that the increase in solar panels actually didn't even come with the removal of the spoil subsidy. It came with the high cost of diesel that we know that a lot of organizations, even SMEs, have to depend on to run their businesses. Again, back to the issue of us not having electricity. So I'm just going to use that as an opportunity to jump into the questions. And I'm going to come back to you, Olumide. But first, let me go to Audrey and piggyback on some of the conversations that we started. And Audrey, I really want to take you into the space around gas. Again, when we look at the recent data, we look at, the issues around renewables. We look at the issue around the future energy demand for Africa. We've also seen the report, very clear report, the International Energy Agency has projected that if we leverage Africa's gas, we can have an extra 90 billion cubic meters annually until 2030. Now, this is on the back that Africa is the most energy deficient continent in the world, because currently 75% of Africa's population, or let me say 75% of the world's population that don't have access to electricity are in Africa. So my question, again, piggybacking on the conversation we've had around gas, is gas the answer to Africa's energy crisis? Yes, we're looking at renewables. Yes, we're looking at clean energy. But again, going by the data, if we were to use our gas, we will also cut short some of the problems we're having. So clearly, is gas the answer to the energy crisis?
All right, Ini, thank you for pulling out that question. Really, it's my space. And because I've had to do a lot of work in terms of building policy, legislation around understanding the economic givers that gas are, I would say yes. And the reason is because I said out this earlier, is the issue of scale. Is the issue of scale. Right? There are so many. I think there's somebody that probably don't mind. So where Africa is now, right, we have multifaceted challenges from a developmental point of view. And the imperatives for industrialization are key. Whether it is that we are talking about the agricultural sector or all kinds of manufacturing, we need large-scale industry that can not only employ a large portion of the population, but also create a very extensive value chain. Remember, we raised the point where I think he said effectively what he was saying was that you can't even employ this burgeoning population in all the traditional types of sectors. So there must be room for them to expand, give them to the entrepreneurial capacities. But here's what we say in the gas sector. We say that when there is no gas, there is no power. And where there is no power, there is no economic development. And therefore, when there is no gas, there is no economic development. Now, one of the points that has also been real, which is very real, is that we have a narrative of how resource rich we are. To begin to ask ourselves, how well are we using those resources? Because this then is the reality. It's not bragging about 290 CF of gas and production. The current level of utilization. And even in that, if you take the Nigeria example, you are exporting so much of that, it becomes challenged. So we found the most resilient economies were those that actually generated their own energy. They bounce back very rapidly. So when we look at Africa, we must be able to leverage those resources, and that gives us skill. That's, yes, they're quite capital intensive. But again, like I said, they enable various kinds of industry. Because whether you're talking about gas to provide power for heating, for cooling, or you're talking about even gas storage in using fertilizers, so we can build agri sector in our pharmaceutical sector. Gas is an enabler. When we're thinking renewables, yes, technology will continue to evolve, but there is a variability factor. So that's your sure, if the infrastructure and the systems are in place and we have the then we are sure that you have stability. So it balances out this other issue of that instability you see from renewables back and forth. So Africa needs to be paying attention to that. Olumide talked about the fact that, yes, before, we have to fight hard for this, taking away the narrative that gas is a dirty fuel. It's not. It's much cleaner than a lot of the hydrocarbons. And besides, for Africa, it can't be that it's not contributing as much, and then we're finding ourselves defunding happening. It makes absolutely no sense. But again, there is push and
okay. So just to
yeah, I want to, it's just a quick one. It is the transition. Yes, how to touch, we can say, well, I have the opportunity. We have talked about this issue of domestic financing. Now, he's very right, but I want to say that the thing that makes this successful is domestic manufacturing capabilities. No matter how much we risk on the continent, if we still have to convert it to dollars or something else and import pipes, components, and equipment to deliver the infrastructure to enable power, we have a problem. So we must, as we are looking at putting together domestic funds, see how we in place the manufacturing of the components that deliver the infrastructure for energy, whether it is the traditional energy or renewable energy. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Audrey. So just to take it from that space, so two things. So someone said here that if we whichever way it is, even if we transition to gas, we still have issues around emissions that will always be an integral part of the challenge. And then the second thing, so I need you to talk on that. Yes, gas is the answer, but there are people still saying, but it's still emissions, we're still going to have emissions issue. Now, the second part is around the manufacturing that you talked about. We currently have manufacturers exiting Nigeria, whether it's on the policy side, whether it's, I read a report yesterday, for some people it's on the profit side, and for some other people, perhaps it's even the capacity to continue to manufacture. You hear the report from the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria talking about first the forex issue, and then, of course, inability to compete because of course, electricity issues. The cost of having to manufacture is so high because of the cost of operations, as it were. So when you talk about us going back to manufacturing, being able to manufacture the components to move, again, this clearly shows the challenges that are very critical in terms of being able to truly meet this just transition by 2060 or 2030, whichever way it is. So what will be your very quickly, what will be your thoughts on these two key issues?
Excellent point. So yes, emissions will continue to be a conversation using gas, just at a much lower level. However, let's remember that in the narrative of the transition and with technological developments, why I remember again, I said that even as Africa, we're in a good place, because it means that as we're growing our energy resources, right, that backbone of energy, we're doing it in a possible in the world that we are today is because of hundreds of years and decades just fossil fuel. That's why nobody was of profits. That is where the narrative changed. So as we as Africa begin to press into energy efficiency, we're also paying, and that's why the just conversation is important. We are paying attention to the impact on the people, paying attention to the impact on the environment, and we're leveraging the available technologies that allow us to do this in a more efficient manner. Remember that even when we're talking renewables, the technology evolving, we're also having to pay attention to the impact those technologies on environments, the content around battery storage and all that. Remember, that's a big thing as well. Even when we look at nuclear, everybody's saying, what are the pros, what are the cons, how can we do more responsibly? And this is what Africa must pay attention to, right? The second thing very quickly is on manufacturing. Ini, you are right. When you were speaking earlier, you pointed to the fact that we are, excuse me, I think on that energy transition index. There is a reason for that. It is because of all these many things that we've spoken to, the inability for us to effectively do business, how it's impacted in the Nigerian and the manufacturing space. And I had said something earlier that the truth is, you know, we can say all these fancy things, but you cannot remove the narrative of your ability to transit from the broader economic, right? You can't do that. So we're saying we can't depend on Forex. We need to raise domestic funds. When you have raised your domestic funds, then what? You don't manufacture pipes. You don't nothing. Jalkuta steel is still sitting there. That would have been one example of something that would have taken away a Forex exposure, that risk exposure of the currency issue. You would have taken it away by at least feeding into the providing of steel from some of the critical infrastructure. So yes, manufacturers are leaving. By pointing to the fact that we must think about domestic manufacturing, believers, we will be having this conversation on and on and on. This is our reality. So what can we do? This is where we begin to talk about the vision of the government. We begin to talk about their commitment to this transition agenda, to even an energy agenda in real terms. We begin to talk about how do we leverage partnerships between private sector, government that can then provide the kind of risk guarantees and securitization that make more attractive for investors to come in. We focus on building local competence in manufacturing. I would love to be able to deliver a gas project in Nigeria where every single thing end to end is manufactured in Nigeria. I'm very proud of the fact that the business I've done for the last 30 years are counting. I have 100, we've always been Nigerians, 100% from a manpower point of view. Everything we've achieved in the gas sector, 100%. But can I tell you from the infrastructure side, I am every day looking at rotation to bring this in. And if you don't do that, you have no project. So yes, this, but the reality that this is not something only they can do. The government must be part of it because the kind of funding required, especially as is made too much. When you come into scale component manufacturing at the scale that can fit into and then reduce your current exposure, you have to start from somewhere. You have to start from somewhere. Otherwise, this is coming to in 20 years, we're still doing this. This is the end of it. Can actually start. As people are leaving, we can also start some things and then look at the broader economic challenges. What are some of them to make it easier to.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Audrey. So I hope everyone is getting their questions ready. Let's get our questions ready.
Ini.
Yes, please.
Sorry, can I just make a couple of submissions here?
Yes, so I'm going to come. So you're next while I'm getting people ready for their question. Olumide, so you just add this to what it is that you want to say. I mean, you raised an issue around diversifying the areas around, you know, this electricity and energy issue. And you talked about, you know, mini grids. Of course, we've seen an increased deployment in terms of mini grids. We've seen the.
Let me forward it to you then.
We've seen what will I call it now? Policies around from the Rural Electrification Agency. We've seen issues around. So currently, I think we have about 100 mini grids that have been deployed that are providing, you know, reliable electricity to some underserved rural areas, as it were. But again, we've also seen the challenges around financing. Financing. And again, as we diversify, what are the clear implications for climate change? I think that the ability to link this issue around just energy, looking at it in terms of equity, in terms of affordability. And when we talk about affordability, Audrey clearly highlighted issues around infrastructure deficit. So how do we make it affordable to be able to ensure that, I mean, this works works for everybody. So we've seen the issue around financing. Investing in the energy sector requires a lot of money, significant capital funds need to be put in. And then, of course, when you put in that significant investor funds, people are not, so someone mentioned it on the chat box, that people are not necessarily looking for clean energy, but cheap energy. So again, the issues around affordability and the implications for the climate change agenda. Olumide, please. So very quickly, so that we can also go to the audience for questions.
Let me just speak very quickly to the last point you made about clean energy versus cheap energy. When the Russia-Ukraine war started, even the global north was looking for cheap energy. Right? We were not overly concerned about clean energy, because you will have a political riot if your energy prices go through the roof. We're having the same situation right now in Kenya, in Nigeria. People are complaining. When the Russia-Ukraine war started, my bill quadrupled. A lot of people were complaining. They subsidized it. Germany reverted to coal. Yeah. So in the grand scheme of things, right, you will always figure out what works for your economy. Now, I just want to put that out. The second point Audrey made about manufacturing, which I emphasized earlier, you cannot import your way out of your situation, right? We've got to focus on manufacturing in Africa, whichever way we do it. Energy is required for that. We just need to figure out a way to do that. Yeah. Last. If you keep importing stuff, that's how we look. The first time I changed the money as an adult, and I speak of the pounds to the naira. This is not story. I changed it. I got £1.06 for my 1 naira in 1983. I'm not an old man, right? Today, I'm changing that 2,000 to 1. It's madness. You cannot import your way out of problems. You got to fix your economy, and we've got to build our economy together. So that's that. Energy is required for that. We've got to do that. However, when you talk about just transition, we're in danger of this conversation becoming very Nigerianized, right? In the same way that when people talk about Africa from the outside, they talk about Africa forgetting we've got 54 countries. We're now talking about gas here being the answer. It's not the answer to everyone. If I'm sitting in Gambia right now, I've got to import gas. That's a cost to me, right? So I will probably focus more on renewable energies. I've got a coastline, right? I'll probably focus on wind. I've got sun burning 24/7. I'll probably focus on the sun, right? So it probably makes more sense for me to build solar solutions in a place like Gambia than it is for me to import gas from Nigeria, because it's a very expensive solution. Yeah. So let's not look at, having said that, you talked about where the investor is going to go. The investor is not stupid, right? Everything costs money, but we want a return. So you look to a large market. And that's why you look at Nigeria as a big focus, right? Nigeria has a massive population. We have massive energy needs. But I'll tell you this for free, and I don't want to get political. If the more you reduce our purchasing power, the less we're able to afford. So all of a sudden, your population, which is a big market, begins to look like, well, maybe it's not worth me being here. So when you say manufacturing sector is existing, they're not, where they exist to. They're not living Africa. They might be living Nigeria. They're going to Angola. Why? Because the political situation, the policy system there works better for them. And, they have a higher purchasing power. I mean, if I look at the Gambia, for instance, I use the Gambia as an example because I've been there recently. Yeah. Your pound, right? Your dollar is 66 dollars to $1. Nigeria is 1,400. So if I'm going to do business, where do you think I'm going to go? They've got purchasing power. Sadly, they don't have the population. So literally, as a business person, I've got to evaluate my risk, because it's all about risk. It's all about risk and long-term transactions, right? So I've got to look at my investment, developmental risks, and where the direction of the country is going. So if I'm sitting in Nigeria and the policies are changing all the time, and the currency is falling, and my returns, because I'm importing stuff in dollars, and my returns are dwindling, then I'll look for another African country to go to. So let's not confuse the situation. We all need energy, right, across the continent, for manufacturing, for development, and all that stuff. But just because somebody leaves Nigeria doesn't mean they're going to go back to Europe. They're going to some other African country. So let's not miss that confusion. But so when we talk about just, and somebody mentioned gas, right? The way I look at it is very simple. And let me contextualize this. If I look at it from the perspective of Nigeria, for instance, and I'm using diesel predominantly to power my economy. If I move to gas as a transition to more renewables, yeah, then I'm reducing my emissions. That is a plus. It's a plus. Let's understand that. I'm reducing my emissions, and that should be recognized. So the more I use gas as a substitute for diesel, that's a good thing. However, let's not get lazy and stop there. We've got to continue. The fact that we don't have a Jakarta steel mill, that's on us. We messed up. The fact that it took Dangote to come and build a new refinery when we had 4 sitting down there doing nothing, that's on us, right? So there's a big difference between the opportunities that we have and the big solutions that we're looking to. Our grid is incapable of distributing the level of energy that we need. So let's not over-focus on the grid. De-emphasize it. The reason why I mentioned mini grids, it's a lot easier to generate those power and distribute it and move it around than you would dependency on the grid. The grid will never get to some parts of Nigeria. It's ridiculously expensive. If it's not there yet, then don't bother. Fix mini grids so that we get, at the end of the day, all I want is energy. I don't care how I get it.
Yeah.
I don't care how I get it. I just want the energy.
Olumide, so let me bring in another dimension to this conversation, and then you will come back and then emphasize this, because the issue around mini grids, again, even when we diversify from the main grid to the mini grid, again, it's still around the affordability, looking at the infrastructure deficits. And then, of course, even with the mini grids, we're having licensing and permits issues, which is also has kind of restricted that place again. But I'm going to come back to you on that. Prof is a panelist there. So very quickly, Professor Amaeshi, you are really deeply concerned around the issues around climate change and the implications of all of this conversation, the implications of this transition to climate change. And I want you to speak to that. We've seen, I think that as much as we do not want to admit it, we in Nigeria are actually seeing the effects of climate change. And we've also seen that across sub-Saharan Africa in the recent years. What does this mean in terms of where we're going and how we're transiting when we talk about energy issues?
Thank you very much. Not that I mean, climate change is a problem, but also we need to situate the problem. And I find it very frustrating when we come to conversations like this, and to a large extent, we become passive recipients of Western views. So I was having a chat with Darren by the side, and there is also this view: you have the gas, you use it, right? But the science appears to suggest otherwise, because as together, we need to be aware of the implications for climate change, the temperature rise, and so on and so forth. So my point is just moving away from the kind of managerial perspective into what I may consider as the political economy perspective of this problem. So if climate change is a global problem, why shouldn't we have a global quotas, for example, whereby those that are polluted a lot would need to remain reduced, and those who haven't, like many African countries, will be allowed to pollute to the point that as long as we remain within that constraint. I'm not a scientist, but the scientists here can inform us better in terms of what is the limit that together as the world or Earth we need to remain within in order to remain sustainable. So if it is done that way, probably then there is a space for African countries to pollute more, use gas and other things to enable us develop and be at, even if I'm not at par with the rest of the world. But this whole point of trying to suggest that we are all starting on equal footing is where the problem is. And if you're talking about the just transition and the world is not willing to move and they're rather imposing things on us, Olumide, I struggle with that. Good friend, Olumide, sorry, I didn't recognize you when I did my opening speech. It was an oversight, pardon me. But
no, it's okay.
I think that's the fundamental problem, that as Africa, we need to have a voice. We need to push a perspective. I mean, yes, they said they won't fund us. I mean, as again, Darren mentioned, oh, you have the money. Then you have the money, you do whatever you like with it. What about domestic mobilization of funds? How can we also create our own money and funds? I don't like the view that we must be dependent on the West because they have the money. Where did they make the money from?
Prof,
Ini,
sorry, Ini, can I make a response to Prof very quickly, please? Can I make a response to Prof, please, very quickly?
Okay, we need to go to the audience for questions.
I know, but let me
limited
respond
time.
to Prof very quickly.
Yes,
Prof,
okay.
Prof, you see, the fundamental issue and the premise from which you start is wrong. This point of you're polluting and polluting, that's where the problem is. And you've given the voice back to your oppressors, if that's the way you want to look at it.
But we haven't polluted as much as they have. That's the point.
Listen to the point I'm making. Listen to the point I'm making. You're moving from diesel to gas as a transition. You're already reducing your pollution. So why are you focusing on pollution rather than the reduction?
What I'm saying is the quota. You missed the point. The point is about quota.
Listen,
quota.
Prof.
Even gas, the gas you mentioned, gas also has its implication for climate change.
Listen.
Olumide, the point there is that if we lose sight on that emission part, they will still come back to us to tell us that gas is not reliable.
No, but you see,
we know what they've done when it came to Ukraine. They moved back, even Germany. So come on, let's be serious about it.
Hold on. And like I said, when we talk about jobs,
guys,
hold on. Can I just finish this point? Can I just finish this point? And you need to recognize this. Yeah.
1 minute, Dr. Olumide, please.
The point is, it's a transition pathway. We're all moving in the same direction. When you talk about pollution, then you're reflecting back on yourself. Look at the transition you're making. And Audrey mentioned this. Yeah. And I said this earlier. If gas is 50 to 60% lower in emissions than what you're doing today, then you're doing a good thing already. That transition allows you to develop your economy. In terms of how you raise your money, raise your money. You see, you can't ask people to give you money and then give them conditions as to how you're going to use their money. Raise your own money. We have money. Let's do it that way. But let's focus on the fact that we are already doing stuff. Now, let me tell you where we're getting it wrong. We're making projects and we're coming up with issues like carbon credits and all that nonsense and carbon swap markets and all that stuff, right? If you're going down a pathway that allows you to emit less and you're creating credits and you're now saying to somebody who you want them to have a quota on themselves, you say you're going to sell your credit to them. What you're effectively saying is, I will give you my own real estate. Keep doing what you're doing. Then literally the burden is now on you.
Not
on everybody else.
We didn't come up with that. This was that's
why
why
buy into it?
We need to have our own voice. We need to also have our own strategies, right?
Exactly.
But if we are there implementing whatever they're throwing at us, I think that's where the problem is. That's why I'm looking at this from this.
Whose fault is that? Is their prerogative?
We are saying the same thing. What I'm saying that let's not look at it from the political
gentlemen.
It's their prerogative.
Okay.
Let me finish with this.
Gentlemen.
To tell you what they want. It's yours to do differently.
This is absolutely the joy of any moderator to get conversations to the point where we are. This is hard talk. Because I think that it's become very critical. For me as a person, I hear what Prof is saying, and Olumide, I absolutely hear what you say. And I think that there's a meeting point. Our African leaders going to these conversations with the fact that a clear understanding of the issues, a clear understanding of the power that they hold, and a clear understanding of the fact that we can bring our money to the table to push the agenda that we want to push. I think that that's where the political will, the political understanding to be able to drive these conversations. And I think this is also going to come. We have very limited time. We want to close this at 12. And I know that we can never, ever completely, finish talking about the issues that come up with this. So there's a huge conversation going on in the chat box that you really, I'm enjoying it. And if you're in it, I think that you can also see it. The conversation is going back and forth in terms of these issues around Nigeria is also one of the big emitters. Also in Africa, you also have 2 other African countries that are also very, big emitters of emissions, as we say. And then there's a conversation around justice. So let me just open this up to, we'll take 2 questions first, and then please, if you have your questions, you can put them there in the chat box, and I'm going to take those questions right away. I think that one of the things that I want to, while we're waiting for those questions to come, please put your questions. Please put your questions, because the conversation I'm seeing here is around, is Africa able to advance the issue around justice? When we talk about whether it's economic justice, social justice, or environmental justice, is Africa able to advance this and its peculiarity on the global negotiations, which is what I said. How are we negotiating? Do our leaders understand the perspective from where we come? The issues Olumide was trying to raise vis-a-vis the issues that, Professor Amaeshi was raising in terms of why is the conversation from that end, when we look at it from the global south, and not us pushing that agenda to say, from our perspective, this is what it is, this is what works for our countries, because of the peculiarity of the African countries. So any questions? I'm looking for those questions and I'm still not seeing it. There's conversation around the funds that the Global North are providing for energy transition is in form of loans. They are not dash. They're not gifts. The funds that are coming to Africa are in form of loans. And this is unacceptable and is locking us all into more debt. Now, the question I want to throw out is, if we are getting more debt in terms of the investments that are coming in terms of these funds that are coming into Africa, what does this mean for us as Africans in terms of how does this change issues around power generation, distribution, and at the end of the day, the usage efficiency? Because the Olumide, there was an issue we're talking about around clean versus cheap energy. So when we look at it in terms of the investment coming into the African market, we're also seeing an underinvestment. So it's not investments, as Jacqueline said, it's more of loans that are given to us to be able to offset some of this energy issues that we have. So I'm throwing this open there for my panelists, the 3 of you. Do you think that there's even hope for us to meet 2030 by a chance? And I want you to look at it in terms of what we saw with the millennial development goals versus the sustainable development goals. Now we're talking about near zero emission by 2030. There is underinvestment in the energy sector in Nigeria. We're still tackling that. We're still tackling issues around power generation itself, whether it's through gas or renewable sources. We're looking at the efficiency use of this resources, of this energy sources. Is there hope? Should we be hopeful?
If I may, I mean, I can answer very quickly. If we're keeping 2030 in view, can just be real, that's not happening. It's very simple, so that we don't sugarcoat it. If I'm not wrong, which I shall not, this is July of 2024. And that tells me that we are effectively 6 years and 2 months to that target. When it comes to the conversations around emissions reductions, across a nation, before you can describe a continent, no matter how many quick steps we take now, there is nothing that changes this overnight. We did not start, and there is a lot of work to be done. So I think we should be setting our own targets for ourselves, but beyond the target setting, what are the concerted sets of actions we will actually take? So I'd raised a point about how if we're not careful, we Nigerianize conversations. I actually think that's fairly normal. I suspect this webinar was hosted in Kenya. There is no way somehow you will not end up. But he did excellently so that if I'm a landlocked country, right, then I don't have access to gas. I don't have hydro. I will do what I can with solar and wind. So everybody will find their solutions. The reason we start with the conversation is because we believe that world should be looking to Africa for solutions in the future. So Africa should be able to get some integrated things right and set up. It just needs us to go into 2025 and everything is politicking. They're focusing on the real developmental imperatives. So private sector players, if you look at the large oil producers, for instance, yes, intentionally because of their global bit to reduce emissions, but it's just one part of it. Do you think Nigeria will stop using diesel in the next 6 years when we haven't dealt with the many structural inefficiencies in the power sector? When we can't provide affordable, when, well, we're doing stuff with renewables that we can applaud, but the scale, I keep repeating, the scale is such that, I mean, we have a long way to go. We've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years under the decade of gas talking about auto gas and clean cooking and all that, and we can see tangible progress, but scale. So if we put scale to context, I want to say categorically that if anybody says we'll be at net zero by in 6 years' time, that person is not period. So we have to face this. But do we want to answer that? The answer is no. If we are already grappling with the impacts of climate change and the environmental degradation is affecting us daily, and this is based on things nothing largely to do with, then what we don't want to do is to create our own basket of impacts that in a few years' time will be adding on to what we're already dealing with. So we must focus on getting the emissions down, on expanding on renewable and cleaner energy, leveraging gas, leveraging solar, leveraging and all that. But let's be clear that we will not meet that target. We can set our own targets, but we must pay attention to the things we must do to ensure that at that time don't push the hopes down further once again.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you so much. Olumide, and very quickly, I want you to look at this. So talking about impact and talking about the reality of our situation. Yes, I understand this issue around, always coming back to the Nigerian space, because trust me, I think that if we're able to get this one thing right within the sub-Saharan Africa as Nigeria, then there's this thing around seeing a multiplier effect across countries. So recently there was this thing around Ghana floating, having a floating solar. I'm sure you saw that floating solar energy, huge solar panel. Now, in all that, and I want you to think about it in terms of impact when we talk about impact of some of these things within the Africa context, and look at what happened within the Niger Delta and the impact that we're still facing. And now situate it within this issue where we are right now. We're talking about sustainable energy, renewable energy, solar panels, is there a possibility that as Africans, I don't want to say Nigerians now, is there a possibility that as Africans, we do not take cognizance of the key challenges that we have before we begin to follow certain standards that are being set for us?
With due respect to my fellow Africans, yes, say Nigeria, because if you fix Nigeria, you fix the rest of Africa. Bottom line,
absolutely, absolutely.
We're 1 in 4. We're 1 in 4. So if you fix fix Nigeria, you fix the rest of Africa. It's just that simple. But let's not just, in fairness to what Audrey was saying, the focus on 2030 is not just Nigeria. It's not Africa. It's global. We're not going to meet that target. We've lost that. That war has been lost. It's totally lost. Forget it. And if you look around the world today, and look at the hurricanes that are, devastating places across the world. Just look to the Caribbeans. An entire country, Grenada, is totally destroyed right now. Jamaica went through a hurricane yesterday. So it's not just Africa, but Africa is feeling the impact big time and will continue to. One thing I will say, going back to Nigeria, look, are we really serious people? And I say this respectfully. There was a Vision 2020, right? Till today, nobody went back and say, did we achieve it? What did we achieve? Why didn't we achieve it? Blah, blah, blah. The problem is you can't fix what you can't measure. We haven't even sat down to understand what our problems are and how to fix it. And every single day, we accept targets and standards that we're not localizing. We don't even understand the implications of these things, but we're signing up to them. We need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what is our own strategy? What is our own timeline? Yeah, the world will continue to change. The world is being impacted by climate change, but we're being impacted by it the most. So as we speak today, our fellow Africans are dying. Yeah, our fellow Africans are moving from one part of Africa to the other because they cannot survive. It's causing stress and strife across. We've got a population that is growing and very impatient and looking for solutions. And sadly, those who are making policies don't seem to understand. As you say, they are not taking cognizance of what's going on. And there's flip-flopping every single way. We need to take a step back, right? And actually analyze the problem. Once you've done a critical analysis of this problem, then you can set a timeline based on what the solutions that you think you want to put in place are. It's no point just putting up your finger and saying 2030, 2050, 2060. We will get to 2060 and we will not have solved any single problem. I can guarantee you this. I pray to God that we're all alive and we'll be having the same conversation again. Or at least the younger ones will be having a conversation. And you and I will sit down over our smoky jollof rice and be asking, how did we get here? Exactly. Because we are not focusing on the long-term solutions. We're just, look, even with this space, this conversation we'll be talking about, let's be honest, and Audrey can speak to that, and even Prof can speak to this. We've spent the last 10 years talking about this $100 billion that we believe the West owes us, right? In the same way we've been waiting for money for reparation for slavery, blah, blah, blah. We can go on. We believe this money is owed to us. It must be given to us as a grant. Well, guess what? Their own economy is falling apart. They got their own strife and struggles to deal with. Why do you think they will give you? Why should they give you money? Why? Because of something they've done in the past? Why? Look, it's your people that is dying. Our people are dying. Why should they care about us? There's
Olumide,
a song that says they don't care about us. We need to focus.
I want you to coalesce your thoughts as your final thoughts, right. And where you are coalesces into the fact that looking at Africa, and yes. I hear you when you say if we're able to get it right in Nigeria, we'll get it. Now, looking at this issue around all that the conversations we've had today, yes. To what extent do you think that if Africa comes together, whether it's at the level of the African Union or even, let's even say at a sub-regional level, from the level of ECOWAS, for instance, or CEDEAO or SADC or the East African communities,
yes,
to say harmonize yourself around the policies that you want to drive, whether it's around energy, whether it's around continental relationships, do you think that we stand a better chance if we went around it? So just use this as your final thoughts, please.
I'll just spend 2 minutes, and I want to end on a very positive note because there's solutions in place. Let's understand something. Finance drives everything that we do. The implications that we have today, talking about climate change, is as a result of the activities that we've done, whether it's industrial, personal, whatever, yeah? Finance drives that. That is why finance is critical, right? To driving the change in the way we do things. Now, on the positive level, we've spoken about two things: the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Zone, number one, which is all signed up to. On the finance side, there's something called AFAC, African Finance Alliance on Climate Change, which is being driven by the AFDB, GFANCs, and some other entities of the continent. They're bringing together various sectors, the banking sector, because people think things in isolation, in solo, yeah? So they're bringing the banking sector, the capital markets, the insurance, and the investor, together. to start thinking about how do you finance our way into the solutions that we're looking for. Okay? And off the back of that, we're doing a number of things. We said earlier about knowledge. The more information you have, the more knowledge you can build, the easier it is for us to have a decent conversation. So we're doing a lot of capacity building in that sector. Once you understand that, the next thing then is understanding the application of climatic risks. And the outcome of that is that everybody has comparable data. You cannot solve problems. Look, we say in God we trust, everybody else bring data. Once you have the comparable data that you can use across the continent, then it's easy for you to compare Gambia with Kenya, with South Africa, rather than just talking about Sub-Sahara, right? Or even Cairo. Once you got that, then the regulators and the policymakers can put in the right policy. That's where we're heading to. You get the right policy in place, then you stop all this somersaulting and flip-flopping, right? Once you get to that point, then you can build proper financial risk management processes. Then at that point, we can access finance, because people can then look at the projects that you're trying to do. They're not just looking at credit risk, they're looking at sustainability risk factors as well as your climatic risks. They're able to benchmark it. And now, even though they're using global standard factors, they're able to localize that solution. So we're now thinking as Africans rather than imported standards, and stop complaining about money. Today, this year, Africa is going to pay more in loans, interest, than we've ever done. Why? Because all this money that you spoke about is being given to us in form of loans. We're not paying attention. So we need to then create, once we've created this, the risking processes, then we'll see the sources of money that we already have. You then blend that with money that is coming in. There's an over focus on the money that is coming in. There's an over focus on what they think we are owed. We own the resources. We keep talking about the fact that the resources for this transition is in Africa. Yeah, look at every single African country. They've got more percentage ownership of this resource. Well, if we own the resource, why aren't we determining the price and value of this resource? Why are we waiting for somebody else to come and determine it for us? Because we don't have the data, because we haven't set the right parameters, because we haven't set the right risk frameworks. We need to do the work first.
And don't you think that you know, so at the end of the day, it still comes back to the issue of the fact that Africa still needs to do its own homework.
Exactly.
If we don't do the homework, we're still going to be dependent on whatever data, whatever information, and whatever funding it's coming from outside. I think that clearly.
Let me just buttress and finish with this. Yeah, just to give things to put in context. Yeah, Nigeria has the largest economy in Africa, right? We've run a green bond program in this country. We've raised green bonds across corporates as well as government. Now, let's just speak to government for a second, because we're talking about not mitigation, adaptation. And the adaptation and resilience projects are typically financed by the government with the help of the private sector. One thing that we have not done properly, we have not built the right project pipelines. We're going on and on about this. You cannot build strategies. You don't know where you're going. So we need the projects to understand, where are these projects? Where are the pipeline? I find it very sad to say that collectively, Nigeria has raised less than 30 billion naira in green bonds at the sovereign level. Nigeria, largest economy, compared to Benin Republic, yeah, whose population size will fit into Lagos and plenty of change. We're able to raise 500 million euros of sustainability bond because they did the homework first. What I'm saying to you is this: we need to do the homework first. Do the homework. And then the money will come. And stop complaining.
Thank you, Olumide.
Thank you very much.
That is it. Darren says no homework equals country risk. So which also inevitably increases the cost of capital. But I hear you when you talk about, you know, Africa needs to sit down and do the homework, because I personally, and that's a personal opinion, think that we cannot, as Africa, whether looking at it from the level of the ADB, at the level of the African Union, at the level of ECOWAS and the various communities, we cannot raise the money. And I think that that's where the conversations around, so many conversations that can come up around this thing. Who determines this cost of capital? Who is determining the cost of capital? Who is determining the country risk, if you will? Who is determining? So someone asked the question around, we cannot be talking about just energy transition without talking about FDI. So Audrey, final words as you also answered this. We've seen that, you know, there's a lot that needs to be done. You've said as much. A lot still needs to be done. We are not meeting those targets because, of course, the conversation around who is setting the targets and all of that, but we need to set our own targets. But do you think that at where Africa is right now, that there's interest, if you will, in terms of driving, you know, foreign direct investment within the energy sector? And what does this mean for the targets that we want to set for ourselves, whether as Nigeria or whether as Africa? Because when you look at it, the issue around financing cannot be taken out of the conversations at all. But who is financing what? So if this funding coming in is coming in as loan, so Olumide mentioned something around the Africa Financing Alliance for Climate Change, which is just one. So when we look at it within the energy sector, and this is a space that you have played in very, very for a long time, do you think that Africa stands a chance to be able to finance itself out of this energy crisis?
Okay, that's an excellent question, Ini. I believe that is a goal that we can set for ourselves. But again, like I mean, this is I don't like to just talk for talking's sake. Our reality is that if we don't put some things in place, that will not happen. And I say this because you have a situation where, because of your country risk, regardless of who defined it, this is, you look at Nigeria, people who are, you have the capital, but you rather go and invest in Kenya. Even we by ourselves are looking for better investment climes. Even within the continent, we're looking for the less risky, multiple climes, right? Now, when you think that domestic capital is looking for that, you begin to ask yourself, what will international capital be doing? And like Olumide has pointed out, they have their own metrics for why it should fund and not fund. So we can, because we do have the resources, but it has to be to create an enabling environment for the capital to sit in country or in continent at whatever level. So you can't remove those factors. And if we are doing the right sets of things, we talked a lot about policy. You know, when you look across African countries, you see a lot of similarities, policy inconsistencies, and that's a big one. Regulations, legislation that are not mature enough, fiscal frameworks that don't support investment, security is an issue, all sorts of things, and there's a whole bucket of challenges. We cannot get to Africa financing itself fully without addressing those things, and that is the reality. So I think I will land on the fact that it comes to the place of a shared vision for what's the energy agenda of Africa. And then for every nation on the continent, how do you fit into that? Within your own nation.
So just so you finish that thought, in terms of, we have not gotten to the point where we can finance ourselves out of the situation. Is that not necessarily? So you've really created the issues around the similarities in the issues that we face. But I think that the problem is that our priorities are different, so which also creates the inability for us to be able to come together to galvanize the efforts. Because if Africa is looking, you know, like we are all sleeping in the same direction, knowing the key issues around this problem and what it will solve for us as Africa, then we are able to dimension what our priorities are and then put money into it. Wouldn't that be better? But I think that our priorities are different in terms of within Africa, which is why we can't work together.
So we cannot work together now the way things are, because like you've pointed out, diverse priorities, diverse realities. We may have similar challenges, but they are all nuanced differently within each particular country. So you are still trying to fashion out what works within Nigeria, and then you're talking about doing an alignment across the whole of West Africa. It's difficult, which is why like I said earlier, there is no way when a Nigeria organization is hosting an Africa conversation that we don't somehow find ourselves coming back to say, let's even figure ourselves out. If we have not figured us out, how are we figure out an Africa-wide thing. And this is one of the key roles that organizations, professional associations, then to have these conversations across the continent. But in terms of what government is doing, it's like waking up and tells you that they want to, I mean, maybe this is a touchy one, but so we're talking in Nigeria. Imagine if the government now said that they want to build a road from Lagos to Moko, for instance. Can we finish something in Nigeria for this? There's a place for a larger broader vision. It's okay. We that things we need to do. If you take the fact that, like where Nigeria goes, Africa follows. I'm not sure that is still 100% true these days, but because of the size of and the potential, if we can get Nigeria right, the ripple effect, that's what we should be looking at, the ripple effect, as it is being able to energy, technical capacity, knowledge, and all that. Those are things we should be looking towards. So I think that there will come a time when we're able to build that Africa financing, but let's even start with, in each country, what can you put in place to give even your local HNIs, your local organization, and people have financial capacity to invest in country? How do you develop your domestic bond markets? How do we had a conversation in Nigeria recently about government tapping pension funds. You say all fraud. But in a good environment where corruption is not such a major driver of so many things, tapping into those kind of long-term resources for huge infrastructure, long-term projects makes sense. So please, let's figure out, is what I'm trying to say. There is a lot of work while having a high-level conversation Africa-wide. I think each nation, we should just kind of try and dimension, how do we get past these legacy challenges? Because all the narratives, they didn't start today. And the changes will not come just oh, Africa is doing energy transition. Okay, great. Nigeria, what Africa are you doing? The decade of gas, how far have you really gone? 4 years into it. Declare energy transition plan. You said that we made all the noise. What are we really doing? How we creating the environment whereby it's not about government, but people can actually decide, I want to take a bite of this and know that and can be scaled sustainably. But if we can deal with, I think that the future begin to see more and more. But I do applaud the efforts that are being made by people like financing institutions in terms of trying to mobilize Africa-wide capital. But there's a place for national efforts as well that feed that same pie. Thank you so much, Ini.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for that. On a final note, Professor Amaeshi, I think that we've clearly defined this whole issues now. And for me, I want you to just end it on the issue around data. I mean, I think that the role of African institutes, the role of the academia, the role of sustainability practitioners within this space across the different segments of economy, whether it's energy, whether it's infrastructure deficit, we need to become that curators of data, because again and again and again, we see it that, the conversations around who defines the cost of capital, who defines the country risk, who is defining these things and apportioning what goes and what doesn't go, who is calculating, the costs of energy, who is calculating, the emissions, if you know what I mean. So I want you to end it, in terms of where you see this, what is the change point? What is the change point for Africa? What is the change point that we need to leave this place thinking about as practitioners, as people who are, interested in seeing Africa galvanize itself and make good progress in this space?
Thank you very much, Ini. Very interesting sessions. Audrey and Olumide done a fantastic job. So, and Darren on the chat has also done some good work trying to be sarcastic at the same time provocative. And I wish I could maintain the stillness of Audrey, despite the provocations. So data is an issue, whether data is an issue in Africa, is also a problem outside Africa. SDGs in particular are currently suffering for lack of good data.
Yeah.
And if you come to Africa, it's even a much bigger problem. But one thing we also shouldn't lose sight of is that data is also political. Data is politics. And let's keep that at the back of our mind. You asked this question about who determines the cost of capital. And people say perception is everything. So Audrey, if I keep telling you Kenya is good and with data, it may not need to probe to understand the data, but that perception in itself makes Kenya an interesting place to invest in. And I keep telling you Nigeria is this and that because of data as well. And it creates a perception, and that perception, most of the investment decisions are to a large extent also based on perception. So politics, data is politics and can be political and it's not neutral, even the 1.5%, even science in itself. So as long as we understand this, I think that's also where as many Africans lose it. If the knowledge is coming from the West, it's good. If it's coming out of Africa, we question it. And we in academia, we also go through that process. If I'm producing data from Africa, I know what it takes me to publish. Whereas somebody in the US will write about a tiny village in the US, the editors won't question and say, why are you using this tiny village in the US to write your paper? And I use some countries in Nigeria, in Africa, asking me to justify why we need to publish on those.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't take these things for granted, and it applies, it goes across. So as long as we are aware of the tension, the politics, and the political dynamics, we, of course, need to do what we need to do. We can't just blame everyone. Let us get our acts together in a way that also enables us to have meaningful conversations when we come to the global stage. That's where I want to leave it. I know we've covered a lot already.
Thank you so much. It's been, the conversations have been very interesting. It's been very energizing as well. Darren, thank you for provoking and scattering the chat box over there. Thank you, guys. Thank you, John, for your comments. Thank you to Boyega. I hear you, exactly. So Boyega is really, reiterating the fact that our priorities across Africa are different, and that's a huge challenge for harmonization of our strength. And then, of course, financing being a very key critical link. We've talked about the flow of FDI, and Kunle Abiola here was talking about, how does this affect the manufacturing sector? I think we've really talked about that. Audrey really spoke on that the truth of the matter is that, can we finance ourselves out of our situation, whether it's within the energy space, whether it's within the manufacturing sector. It is a critical issue for us, and also a sustainability issues as well, whether we like to admit it or not. So thank you to everyone that has really, looked at it. I think it was Boyega that asked a very interesting question, and a very thought-provoking one that I want to leave us with as we go, to say, what will a developed Nigeria look like? A Nigeria that ticks, the boxes on the index, at least to a good extent. What will a developed Nigeria look like? And what does that invariably mean for sub-Saharan Africa and the African continent as a whole? So I really want to thank you, my panelists. Mr. Olumide Lala, thank you so much. I know that if I left you and, Professor Amaeshi today, we will not live here. But then that shows, I think, for us, the gift that we have in Africa is not just the intellectual capacity that we have, but the ability to dimension these issues and be able to situate them within the realities of the continent and the work that we've done over the years. If we want to talk about the peculiarities of the different African continents, I had the privilege when in the African Union to travel to almost 45 countries within the African Union. And trust me, our priorities are different. Our priorities are different. As much as our problems have the same faces, Our governmental priorities are different. And that's where the political will, the political drive, the need to be able to change the face of Africa becomes a leadership issue. And I think that once we are able to drive the conversations around the kind of leadership we have in Africa, then we'll begin to see the kind of change, the kind of just economies, just political and social economies that we want to see. So I want to say thank you so much, and thank you so much to my panel. Please, those of you in the chat room, can you please, put your hands together for our panelists today? They've done an excellent work. Audrey, thank you for keeping sleep away and not staying with us. Let me leave that, the vote of thanks to Eustace, who is representing the L&D and is also the vice chair for our executive council. Eustace, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Ini. I don't have much again to say. You already did a very good closing remarks. But let me thank you personally, Madam Ini Abimbola, for doing an excellent work as usual, leading the organization in Nigeria in the absence of our Professor Ken. And to Professor Kenneth Amaeshi for also speaking on the side of equity for Africans. We've seen a number of double standards going around the world in terms of that's called global politics. In this case now, as it regards to energy transition. So it's been a very thought-provoking afternoon for every one of us. I'm thinking that, and I'm hopeful that we have learned enough this afternoon with regards to energy transition, how it works, and what the implications for companies, institutions around Africa and the governments in Africa as well. So may I also thank our speakers, Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo. Thank you so much for making time to be with us. I'm hoping that you join the Spain Institute very soon as well. And so Mr. Olumide Lala, for those thought-provoking discussions and your conversations. Thank you so much, talking on the part of the unique challenges that we have in Africa. Many thanks to everyone that has participated today. I'm hoping that this, for some of us that are not members of Spain already, that this will enable you, this will convince you. So join Spain. Sustainability is no longer an all-commerce profession. You begin to understand that you need to equip yourself with the skills to be competent in the work you do. And Spain is here to support you as an individual or as an organization. So once more, thank you to everybody that has participated. Thank you to the Secretariat. Thank you to the Board of Trustees and Board and the Executive Council for your leadership. And on that note, I will say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eustace. Thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you at our next webinars. Please ensure that you are on our you're subscribed to our news channels so that you can also get the information. Please follow us on all our social media handles. It's very important. And as Prof said earlier, please share with us ideas and areas you think that the institutes can do better. We're going to be getting our chartered status very soon. So if you're not yet a member of SPIN, I hope that you will be one, so that we can also, the knowledge sharing, the capacity to share this knowledge, innovate, is also part of what will help us to grow this continent. Once again, thank you so much, everyone, and have a good afternoon. Thank you. God bless. Yes, the recording will be shared. The recording will be shared to all participants. The Secretariat will handle that. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.
My motivation to join Spain was quite organic. I've been in the industry for about 21 years, and I was really enthralled by the idea that we would actually have a group of professionals who are particular and passionate and intentional about sustainability and the growth of sustainability. And I was able to identify the need. That was a gap for a lot of organizations in Nigeria in terms of understanding the actual importance of sustainability and the difference between sustainability and CSR and CPR, etc. I serve as Executive Council member under Strategy and Membership, and also as the chairperson, and I actually volunteered for the role, believe it. And sometimes I wonder why I volunteered, but then I'm always reminded because of the impacts that we infer and carry out to the members of SPIN and to other organizations. Currently, this is our 4th cohort, and we actually established SPIN right in the middle of the pandemic, and it was really interesting that was when SPIN really grew, because people began to understand the importance of sustainability, the importance of health, the importance of our planet, and also the importance of impact investment. So yes, so right now we have about 64 members, and as you can hear, they're all around us quite excited about what we're doing. And I look forward to what SPIN is going to do in the next 10, 20, 40, 50, 100 years. This is the beginning. Watch out for us. It's going to be exciting. Welcome to SPIN. Thank you.
It's an epochal moment. It's been a journey. Usually you have different plants. Some come up after 3 days. Some can stay in the ground for as much as a year and you don't see any sprouts. But the thing is that even when you don't see the outward growth, the root of that plant has grown very good. I think for me, I would like to applaud the leadership of SPIN, the BOT, the members of the Executive Council, who have up to this point doing a yeoman's job. Today we are 200 members strong. And we're not just 200 members strong, we are 200 quality and qualitative members strong. The next stage for us is we are already working on getting chartered. Besides getting chartered, we are looking at organizing members as an industry force to be able to start to fight for rights and benefits that should put our members in the right place. So for me, I think we've laid the foundation. And like I said, at some point in the ceremony, what we are experiencing now, that is the 4th induction ceremony, since 2019 when we formally became a professional body. But before that, there was almost 15 years of groundwork, of meetings, of deliberations, of stakeholder engagement and management to see how we could all come together and get the institute formalized and give all our people a pride of place as members of a professional body that looks out for them, that caters for their needs, that advocates for them, and can stand in place of dispute resolution if such things arise with the organization. So that's how the journey has been so far.
I feel overjoyed actually. I mean, this is, SPIN, sustainability professionals. Now, I've been practicing sustainability for a while now, worked with the NGOs and then working with advertisement as a sustainability analyst, written sustainability reports, compiled CDP reports and other stuff. But then, you have to be part of a body, you understand, who actually demonstrate these things, who have been in this space for a very long time, so that you learn more, you gain more, and you also go with the flow. Remember, sustainability is not something that you just keep leeching on. But I think whenever you see sustainability or whenever sustainability is being said, you should know that it's something that evolves all the time. So whoever you meet, wherever you go, you just have to keep learning.
I decided to be a SPIN member because I've been practicing sustainability first out of passion, and then I got certified. However, the absence of a professional body where you find like minds, you're able to network, you're able to get more resources, made it very, very difficult in Nigeria until I stumbled upon SPIN, and then my eyes lit up. So the journey of being an inductee today has been one that has been long coming. So glad to be here eventually, and I'm ready to work, ready to serve, and ready to be active, because I learned from the speakers today about being a sustainability activist. It's first inborn with us, but now the platform of SPIN helps us express it better. And we look forward to making a bigger and better impact.
Attending the induction today, has actually been a dream come true. It's quite interesting, to be a part of a body, where sustainability is entrenched and actually practiced. And it was good seeing faces that I've seen in other sectors who are also now sustainability professionals. What I really intend to take away from being a member is the networking. And I also learned that there are different directorates. So, it would be nice to be a part of the learning and development team, as well as some other directorates as well, as I get to know more. But it's really interesting, attending induction and then seeing a lot of people that I actually know, and I've learned a lot, and I hope to learn some more.
Today's induction has led to a landmark for SPIN, hitting our first 200 members, and we are still counting. And we hope to put it, like our speaker says, tweet about it, X about it. We'll put it on LinkedIn, on WhatsApp, and all the social media to let you know that there are some professionals that are really out to make sure that the earth resources is being used in a sustainable and responsible manner. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, since inception, SPIN has done quite a number of things, up to advocacy, and of course, organizing training programs on sustainability related topics. We have our membership development unit that has done quite a number of webinars, and also by our presidents. And of course, trying as much as possible to take the sustainability message to other sectors of the economy.